Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Scott Jeffery Miller. Welcome, Scott.
John, great to see you again. I so enjoyed interviewing you on your book a few weeks ago, and what a delight that you would return the favor by inviting me on your show today. Thanks for the spotlight.
Great. As viewers who've watched the show for a while, and Scott is our 225th guest, I think. So we focus on what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment. And when you exert it as a leader, as you will definitely discover that Scott is, you do it with a reason of bringing people together for common cause. Welcome, Scott. We've already done the welcome, so let me tell the folks all about you. You have quite an extraordinary background, and I've heard you speak many times, and I love your sense of humor. I don't think I've ever heard a speaker be more self-deprecating than you. You have a wonderful charm. Anyway, you're from Central Florida. You work for Disney Corporation, and you worked to Stephen Covey. You were recruited by his team. You built a 26-year career as in leadership development and as an exec VP, and you are, as our friend Ron Carucci calls you, an entrepreneurial marketing force. So, and you're the author of a bunch of books. The newest one is one I like a lot, The Ultimate Guide to Great Mentorship. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, John. Thanks for the spotlight.
Great. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot right away because I heard you say this in public. So now it's going to be even more public. You said you claim that you are not a good member. You claim that you're not a good mentor. So why write this book?
Well, I think I may have also said publicly, I tend to write books for me, not for the audience. I write books that I think I would benefit from, and then I market them to people that are like me in the hopes that they learn from them. So I think I'm a decent leader. Yeah. After having spent 30 years in the leadership development industry, but I don't think all great leaders make great mentors. Many of the competencies that we perfect as leaders, peeling the onion, asking smart, penetrating questions, being in persuasive mode, those aren't always skills or roles you should play as a mentor. So in my attempt to be a better mentor, I wrote myself a book called The Ultimate Guide to Great Mentorship, and several thousand people are choosing to buy it each week. So I'm delighted.
Well, that's great. The book is a treat. Now, the subtitle is there are 13 different kinds of mentors. So how did you define so many types? I know at the beginning of the book, you say somebody said 5, another said 15, and you said too many. So how did it come to be 13, Scott?
Well, what really happened is HarperCollins invited me to write this book. They thought that the mentorship world needed a more practical, applicable book. And so I actually, John, ginned up 15 roles that I think mentors play. And when my editor came out of his coma and said, no, Scott, have you ever heard of the book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? I have. I sold 50 million copies of them over the last 2 decades. He said, it's got to be less. So in my style of grand compromise, I took it from 15 way down to 13. And I landed on 13 important roles that I think that mentors play. And the book is 13 chapters about each of those 13 roles.
Great. Well, I want to delve into the ones that popped out of me. We don't have time to cover all 13, but let's dig into the ones that popped out at me. And one is first of all, let's clarify, because you say very clearly in the book, this book is intended for mentors, not necessarily mentees. Right. So you say there is a role called the revealer role, where discovery begins. Explain what revealer in the context of mentoring means, Scott.
Sure. I mentioned there are 13 roles. Number 1 is the revealer, and number 13 is the closer. Everything else in between can happen in any style. Go anywhere, start everywhere. 5 isn't 5 for a reason. 8 isn't 8 for a reason. But the first role is the revealer. I think this is the most important role that mentors play, John, and that is to uncover, kind of like a paleontologist or an archaeologist, to gently brush away. What is it that your mentee is trying to accomplish? What are they trying to get done? Do they want to become a podiatrist? Do they want to go to law school? Do they want to become a vice president? Do they want to become a cupcake maker? Like, what's their plan? And your job is to help them uncover and discern. Your job is to uncover so that they can discover. I think the biggest mistake mentors make, John, is they kind of come in as a leader, a big charismatic force. They prescribe, and they say things like, "Well, if I were you, I would do this." Well, you're not your mentee. You're someone else. Don't live vicariously through your mentee. The revealer is self-aware about their own style, their tone, their rate, their pitch, their voice, their creativity, their dominance, their courage, and they set the conditions for the mentee to be very comfortable being uncomfortable, to talk about their fears, their concerns, their passions, their joys, their traumas, so that they can decide and discern what it is they'd like the mentor's help accomplishing.
Great. I think you hit on a key point here, and this is why maybe some leaders do not make good leaders, even though they're very well-intentioned, is the factor that you mentioned, dominance, and if I'm an authority figure and I'm working with you and I might suggest something, do you think the mentee might, and it's not right for him, might be intimidated to push back? What's your experience, Scott?
There's no question. I think, the vast majority of times when you have a mentoring relationship, John, you have a mentee and a mentor, and usually the mentor is more seasoned, more experienced, more educated. Usually they're older. Usually they're higher in the organization. Not always, but usually. And therefore, they're going to be a little bit intimidating to the mentee. So it's important that one of the roles is the activator, which is a very responsible role when you are actually saying to your mentee, yes, I think you should go to law school. No, I do not think you should be a commercial airline pilot. And here's all the reasons why, based on what we've talked about and how I've listened to you. I think it's super important for the mentor to understand what it's like to be mentored by them, to know what it's like to be on the receiving end of feedback and instruction. It really requires a level of self-awareness that is unnatural for most leaders. And I write about that in the chapter dedicated to the first role, the revealer.
Great. And I think that's important. And we often talk about this in the world of coaching. And I always salute the folks that go into the coaching process. It takes a measure of courage and guts to open yourself up to new learning when it's all about you. So, and I think that's an important element in it. So the next chapter that popped out to me is the boundary setter. Why does a mentor need boundaries? So why did you hit on this element, Scott?
Well, this is role 2. And I think it also should be demonstrated early, if not second, early in the relationship, where oftentimes the mentee doesn't really know what the social norms are of mentorship, right? They may not be as seasoned or as politically savvy. For many cases, it could be a high school student or, someone from a disadvantaged population that doesn't have the same level of business acumen or social sophistication that the mentor might have. Not always, but often. So I think it's vital, John, that the mentor set boundaries. This is the role I intend to play, and these are the roles that I won't. There's a difference between mentorship and coaching, mentorship and sponsorship and allyship. I don't think they're the same. They can become the same when the mentee behaves their way into a reputation of being trusted and delivering on commitments. But I think the mentor should say, listen, I'm not a therapist. I'm not your bank. I'm not your Rolodex. What I can do is bring to you my level of successes and failures and marshal them based on your talents and your vision and your desires and help you maybe avoid some of the mistakes that I made and glean some of the wisdom I have from my own career and life journey. Now, I think that boundary setters should set the boundaries high, right? Good fences make good neighbors. When I mentor someone, I make it very clear. Do not ask me for a loan. I'm not going to invest in your business. Don't ask me to be your ally or champion. And by the way, I'm not going to give you access to my celebrity network. This is something I hold quite clear. Now, some, John, might hear that right now as me being scarce. It's not true. I am an evidence-based, very abundant person. But you have to earn your way into me to give you a connection to Martha Stewart, to J-Lo, or to Matthew McConaughey, or someone that I might know because I'm a talent agent. So I set the boundaries very high, and then I sit back and I watch how often you are on time, how well prepared you are, how you hold confidences, how self-aware you are. Do you both make and keep commitments to yourself and to me? And once you have demonstrated to me that you earn the right, I might invest in your business. I might become your ally or your sponsor. I might give you a connection to my network. But I want to make sure you don't ask for that and make it awkward or embarrassing for any of us early on.
No, I think that's a very important thing. The two things that popped out at me are structure and, as you said, the fences, setting the boundaries, because that frames what the relationship will be. And as you said, you've openly said, it may evolve into other things. But if you open with the possibilities, a young person or anybody might become starstruck and not and miss what he or she can learn from a person like yourself. So I think that's
that point. Also, I think you're also preventing your mentee from being embarrassed or placing you in an awkward position where you need to say no. And by the way, John, I think it's a two-way street. I think when the mentor is declaring what their boundaries are, they should invite the mentee to say, and perhaps you have some too that you want to share with me. I'm happy to respect anything that you like me to be aware of. It isn't just a one-way street. Typically, the mentor is leading the culture of these sessions, not the agenda, not the scheduling, not the items. That's the mentee's job. But I do think setting the boundaries prevents a lot of awkwardness and a lot of embarrassment so that the mentee knows what they can and cannot ask of their mentor.
No, that's good. No, that's an important thing. And I liked your focus on avoiding the embarrassment, because we come into this as adults. One is more senior to the other, but it's more of a relationship. And you hit on something which is critical. I've always thought about mentorship, and that's the sense of reciprocity. The mentor is giving his time or her time, but the mentee owes it to the mentor to engage in the process, to be committed to the process, and to listen and to learn. So I think that's twofold.
I have been interviewed and people have taken exception at my position that mentorship is not associated with allyship, sponsorship, and championship. I say, oh no, it can be. It can be. But coming in as a mentor does not mean I'm your sponsor. I don't know you from Adam potentially. I have no idea what your work ethic is or what your character is or how trustworthy you are. But I sure hope you rise to the occasion where I move from mentor to sponsor to ally to champion. Not always, but sometimes.
No, that's a good point. Now, because we're getting into a little bit of the tension in here, and so you have a mentor role you call the challenger.
Yeah.
And I'm going to flip it. So, what are the pitfalls of being a mentor who is a challenger? So.
Well, you could come across as too aggressive, right? You could come across as too omniscient or too pushy. I'm a naturally high courage person. Not everyone receives my courage with the same way I think it's being presented, right? I mean, rarely do we see ourselves as the world sees us. I think you could push on someone's goal and they could interpret that as you shutting it down when you're just trying to help them refine their thinking on it. So I think it's important that you know, again, what it's like to be on the receiving end of a conversation with you, because I have a fairly stern voice, a very loud voice, I have a very strong presence, and I can be unintentionally quite intimidating. By the way, I can also be somewhat intentionally intimidating as a parent, as a leader. I think it's important to know how to challenge your mentee best, and that will be different in different circumstances.
Great. So you hit on something there, because you do have a strong personality. It's vibrant. I mean, it's wonderful on the stage. So how do you throttle it back, or do you throttle it back when you're in a mentor relationship?
Yeah.
So.
As you know from reading the book, John, I spend much of the first role, the revealer, focused on self-awareness. And we hear this term so much. A mutual friend of ours is Tasha Eurich. She wrote a great book called Insight on this topic. Best book on the topic I think has ever been written. But I think we talk a good game about self-awareness. Few of us are really self-aware about what it's like to be around us, to be married to us, to be led by us, to live with or next to us, to be on a committee with us. And so it's important that mentors marshal an unnatural level of maturity and self-awareness and know when to deploy the right communication style in the right circumstance. If I'm mentoring someone who's a college freshman, it's going to be different than someone who's trying to move from an SVP to an EVP. So I just have to make sure that I care enough about my mentee to understand their personality, what might be their fears, what is their journey, what types of communication style that might be unnatural for me do I need to summon so that I can have greater influence. I might even declare, I might say, hey, listen, John, you'll recognize that I'm a pretty strong person. I have a very confident personality. I can sometimes bluff my way to success. So let's make sure that if you ever feel like my style is getting in the way of my intent, tell me. I give you permission to say, Scott, can you take it down a notch? Scott, you take a breath. That won't offend me. That's a gift, because mentorship is two ways. I'm going to learn from you as much as you're going to learn from me. And I want my mentee to be honest with me so that I can be more influential with them.
And that's a great thing. Now, I think it gets into from the challenger is and this is what I think a lot of people think that mentoring is, and maybe why you get challenged on it. Mentor as a validator. So explain what a validator is and its role in mentorship.
Well, this is my favorite of all of the 13 roles. And I think it's the one that should be used with the most caution, with the most infrequency. I do not think that as a mentor, you should be validating every idea that comes out of your mentee's mouth, or every behavior, or validate them for showing up on time. I think that's a misuse of this role. This, however, is a role that can be life-changing for someone, where you are genuinely, authentically, judiciously validating your mentee's genius. You slow down, take a pause, you change your voice inflection and your tone. You stop and you say something like, John, I want to take a time out for a moment. I want to stop this conversation, and I'm going to ask you just to listen to what I'm going to say next. And I'm going to invite you not to dismiss it or dispute it or refute it. John, I noticed that when we have these conversations, you tend to take copious notes. You write things down, you repeat back what I said. And for some people, this might be a little bit pedantic or excessive, but I notice you like to get things right. You are a very precise person. You recap what I say in the same words that I say it in. And this is a superpower you have, John. It's one of the reasons why I like you so much, is because you don't ad lib a lot. You listen intently, and you use the same words that the person said to you to check for understanding, to make sure that you are practicing empathy in your listening. This is a superpower, John, and it will often serve you well. Now, sometimes, like all of our skills, if taken too far, it can become a weakness. But I really, John, want you to hear me. I think one of your superpowers is how precisely you name things based on using the same words that other people used. You always check for congruence. Now, you get the point there. I value a superpower.
Yeah, I just want to call attention to the audience on what you just did was a master class, a mini master class in changing the tempo of the conversation. You used the word pause, but you did it for effect. It's theatrical, and I don't mean downplaying that. What it is it calls attention to, this is an important message. Flash, flash, flash. And I could see your voice change. You slowed it down. And that is varying the tempo in a style of communication. Because you, as you said, you're a high energy person. You come across that way. When you were speaking to me, the energy was there, but it was direct, it was focused. And I felt, I got to change myself, Scott.
Thank you for noticing. It was intentional and it was genuine, as were the words I used to describe you. But that's the validator. Is you have a chance to be a transition figure in someone's life. Not every call, not every idea. Use it with great caution, and you have the chance to name someone's genius in them that they never knew existed.
That is a very powerful thing. And so many people I've heard them say about whether they've used the word mentor or maybe it was a boss or whomever that gave them life-changing advice, just as you had said. It happens. So now, in that same vein, we move from validator to distiller. So what is the distiller role?
Yeah, this is probably the most ambiguous of all the roles, right? Because think about like distilling beer, craft beer. I don't drink beer, so I don't know the process, but I know there's hops and there's barley and there's yeast and other stuff like that. The distiller really is the role prior to the activator. The activator is the role that says, John, I think you should be a podiatrist, not a commercial airline pilot. You love people, you love talking, you love engagement. I think you want to see 60 clients a day, not one pilot a day stuck in the cockpit. Before that, this is the distiller, where you're sort of the archivist. You've been taking notes, you've been listening, you've been discerning, you've been distilling all the things that the mentee might be wanting to pursue or do, and you're kind of bringing them all into, to use a metaphor, the kind of beer they really want to drink or want to serve. It's a role that probably happens throughout mentorship. It isn't like in session 4, halfway in, you're the distiller. You'll find the right time to say, okay, you've talked about all these things you could do, these things you shouldn't do, these things you want to do, these things you don't like doing. Let's distill it all in, and let's together make a decision on what you're going to do. So now we can discuss how you're going to do it.
Okay. The how leads us to, because you have another role called the navigator. So what role does navigation play? So
I kind of liken this to being a substitute teacher, where you kind of only have to be one day ahead of your students, right? I mean, there's a lot of science teachers that are now teaching math because of whatever's going on in public education. And they'll tell you, you know what? I just have to be one day ahead. And I think the navigator is kind of like that. A metaphor might be you're in a cave, and as the mentor, you're wearing a hard hat with a light, and you're just right in front of your mentor. You may not know, as a mentor, how to launch a farmer's market. You may not know how to apply to medical schools. You may not know the process of earning your pilot's license, but you can help research it. You can be one day ahead. You can ask smart, open-ended questions that will allow your mentee to avoid the potholes that you see right in front of you. That does not mean as the mentor, you have to have deep expertise on every entrepreneurial venture or every major in college or every promotion or role in a company. You just have to have a curiosity and a passion to help your mentee, to help them navigate the process by asking great questions, encouraging them what to research, and maybe on occasion, even doing some research yourself. So you're surfacing some things that your mentee may not know, even to ask.
I loved how you talked about just being one day ahead of your student. And what you've really done there is give us a commercial for, yes, you too can be a mentor, because you said you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know all the how-tos. You need to be curious. And that is so elemental to what leadership is about, is to discovery. And I think that's a powerful lesson. So anyone who's thinking about, oh, it would be good to be a mentor, but I don't know where I begin. I begin with the navigator.
John, this is why I wrote the book, right? Because I wanted people to feel more comfortable being a mentor. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to have good questions. That's how. And the book is chock full of scripts and questions and things you can ask. It's an easy breezy read. You can read the book in 2 or 3 hours. I have an online 90-minute certification course, take a deeper dive. I wanted maybe people that have been volunteered or voluntold to become a mentor in their company to feel more confident about the process.
That's Corbett. And I'm glad you mentioned, I was going to talk about at the end of every chapter, there are some questions to ask that you can formulate yourself, but takeaway points, very specific. Now, a big question, you have 13, actually there's a 14th, because this gets into your sense of humor that I know. The bonus one, quickly describe what the bonus one, bonus type.
I don't want to.
Okay.
There is a bonus role. It's called the jerk, and it's meant to be a little tongue in cheek, right? This is not one of the 14 roles. There are 13 roles, and then there is this bonus role called the jerk, and it's meant to be a little tongue in cheek on all the things you don't want to do as a mentor.
Well, I'm pointing that out, Scott, because I know you have a wonderful sense of humor. And that humor and that passion for what you do is evident in the book, and it makes it accessible. This is not it's a how-to manual, but with a smile. And it gives you a nice touch on it. So now I have a question, because I haven't figured this out. There are 13 types, really. Can we slide from different roles? Can we be a validator one time, an activator another? Or how do you see that, Scott? So.
And you should, within the context of maybe the same mentor call. So here's a couple of caveats. I love that you asked this question. These are 13 roles you can play, not 13 roles you should play. These are 13 roles you're going to underplay, and sometimes you're going to overplay, for good or for bad. I think once you understand your mentee, what she wants to accomplish, what he's trying to get done, then you decide which of these roles you should play. And I think you should move back and forth with them kind of effervescently. I don't think you should declare, well, I'm now going to move into the challenger role, or I'm now going to be the validator. I mean, maybe you do that if the humor is right or the rapport is right. But I think the key is identifying which role you think you should be playing effervescently, undetectably by your mentee, how often, with what frequency, with what rarity. It may be you could fatigue someone by being the challenger every call. You could over validate someone, and now they have no idea what they're really great at, because they're great at everything. You could also over vision. One of the roles is the visionary, and it's contrary to what you think it's going to be about. I think innately we think vision as being a good thing, but you can crush someone under a vision that is in fact a vision for what you want to do, not what your mentee should be doing.
And that's the point. That is a point you make multiple times throughout the book. It's not about you, the mentor. It's about the mentee and what you can deliver. And that's a leadership equation. Unfortunately, Scott, we're rushing toward the end of our half hour here. And as you know, I ask every guest a story about grace. And I'll just kind of feed this. You have been sharing the story of cleaning out your parents' home, and the artifacts you've shared. It's a very powerful and touching story. And you have 3 sons, and they've been part of it too. So, is there a story about grace you want to share with us? That's a moment of grace that I certainly saw. But do you have something else or an elaboration, Scott?
Well, I might even use a different story. As you know, I mentioned I was the chief marketing officer for the FranklinCovey Company for a decade. I spent 25 years in the firm with Stephen Covey and the CEO, Bob Whitman. And as the CMO, I made a few mistakes. Nothing unethical or illegal, sometimes close. But the CEO is a man of enormous grace. And I remember once I launched an event, like a marketing event. I named it something without Googling it to see had anybody trademarked it. Well, sure enough, 10 cities and couple $100,000 of marketing in, we get a cease and desist letter from an attorney representing a professor who had trademarked that event. So I go in hat in hand to the CEO to confess my sin. And the first words he says are, "Sit down. Let me tell you about a time as an entrepreneur. I once put a bunch of billboards around town marketing my business and had to take them all down because I had not done the research to know whether or not it was trademarked." He wasn't licensing bad behavior. He was just letting me understand he'd been there, and he provided me a tremendous amount of grace. And it made me want to rise to a higher level of competence and character around him because he'd given me so much grace. I'll never forget it. Thank you, Bob Whitman.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful story, and it's a transformative event, and I think you're carrying forward that lesson from Bob in the work that you do. So, as you know, Scott, how can we find this wonderful book?
Everywhere. It's at book retailers everywhere. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Book Pal, your local bookstore. You can visit greatmentorship.com. It has 13 videos that describe all 13 roles. You can check out my online certification program. John, I appreciate I like a lot of things about you. I love to follow your social media. I love to read your books and your poetry and listen to you play on your piano. But I think everything of what I like about you the most is you are the personification of what Dr. Stephen Covey called an abundance mindset. Thank you for having me on today. I appreciate you.
Wow. Thank you, my friend. Boy, I'm honored. With that, we will go out. So,
thank you, John.